At times, the Intercontinental Championship has been like a warm blanket of guaranteed excellence. On cards like SummerSlam 1995, where we've been given the likes of Diesel versus King Mabel in the main event, at least we've had a stellar Intercontinental Championship match to look forward to beforehand, such as the Razor Ramon versus Shawn Michaels ladder match. And on rare occasions, the IC title has been the most important match on the card, like at SummerSlam 1992 with Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog. But for all those incredible memories the championship has given us, whether it's Steamboat versus Savage, Ambrose versus Owens, Cactus Jack versus Randy Orton, right in the motherfucking thumbtacks, man. But for all that being said, there have been some shocking choices for Intercontinental Champion that have dragged the belt down quite a bit, and on one occasion the once prestigious belt was even retired altogether because WWE couldn't be bothered with it at all. We all know how great the Attitude Era was. It was when Vince McMahon lost his mind for the first time, but in a good way. But a result of that was some shocking booking as well, including some of the choices for Intercontinental Champion, which is where we're starting our list today. WWE could have learned a lesson or two after the disaster of crowning Billy Gunn King of the Ring in 1999, a tournament that also starred Viscera and Al Snow of all people. But no, in 2000, the former Smoking Gunn won the once prestigious title from Eddie Guerrero of all people on an episode of SmackDown. Having dropped the annoying ass man gimmick, a gimmick which Gunn shamelessly stole off Ed Leslie by the way, he was now just, bland, having taken up the lame moniker of the one Billy Gunn. 17 days after winning the belt off Guerrero, Gunn was absolutely decimated for the title by Chris Benoit at the Armageddon pay-per-view, and quite right too. You know how I just said that it was Benoit who beat Gunn for the belt? Well, Rikishi beat Benoit for it on an episode of SmackDown in the year 2000. That's right, Chris Benoit, everyone's favourite bae until 2007, had to lay down for Rikishi. Rikishi held the belt for just 14 days, and it was around the time that he was seemingly being considered for a massive push as he got to the finals of the King of the Ring tournament that year as well, before thankfully being beaten by Kurt Angle. Rikishi lost the Intercontinental title to the slightly more worthy Val Venis, but Rikishi Mania would continue later on into the year. Let's not forget, of course, that it was Rikishi who ran over Stone Cold Steve Austin. Never forget, guys, never forget. I'm an Albert fan in all of his forms, apart from Tensai, obviously, but there was no way the future hip-hop hippo should have been anywhere near the Intercontinental title. Albert would win the belt from Kane in June 2001 after a little help from hopelessly miscast Diamond Dallas Page during his Stalker phase. Surprisingly, it would be Albert's only ever title win in WWE. He held it for just 25 days, but he did get victories over the likes of Edge and even managed to retain against The Undertaker by DQ. It was a really weird time in WWE though, right around the invasion, and I don't think anybody was thinking straight at the time. It's the Mountie, as the song goes, but what's he doing winning the Intercontinental Championship, I hear you ask? It was 1992 and Bret Hart was keeping the IC title prestigious and had held it for 5 months. That's before everyone's least favourite Canadian policeman got involved. Bret Hart won the title from Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam 1991 in one of the best ever Intercontinental Championship matches, so it was a shame to see him lose it here, except we didn't see it because it was on a house show. The Mountie held the belt for all of 2 days before dropping it to Roddy Piper at the Royal Rumble. Hart would end up winning the belt back at WrestleMania in a match against Piper. Poor Marty. Things hadn't fully gone south for Jannetty in May 1993. His tag team with Shawn Michaels had ended in January 1992, and the two were feuding over the IC title. To be fair, it had been clear for ages that Shawn was the real superstar out of the former tag team, whether heel or babyface, so it was no surprise that Jannetty beat him for the belt on Raw, for him to only hold it for 20 days before dropping it back to Michaels in a non-televised match. For the lesser achieving former Rocker, it would be his only Intercontinental Championship reign and his only major singles title at all. Ahmed Johnson was being lined up for greatness in 1996, beating Goldust for the Intercontinental title at King of the Ring to become the first ever black champion. Johnson certainly was on the right trajectory after a debut that included body slamming Yokozuna when he was at his heaviest. Despite the new generation era providing us with some absolute nonsense to sit through, the IC title had been a shining beacon of hope on many cards after being held by the likes of Shawn Michaels, Jeff Jarrett and Razor Ramon, but unfortunately Johnson's reign would not be held in such high regard. Just as he was gaining momentum as champion, Johnson was forced to vacate the title due to falling ill with a kidney problem. When Johnson returned to the WWE 4 months later, the landscape had changed and he ended up getting lost in the mid-card heading into 1997. I just mentioned there that the IC title was like a beacon of hope in mid-90s WWE, with the likes of Goldust, Michaels, Jeff Jarrett and Razor Ramon all doing really good work while champion. But I neglected to mention Dean Douglas, and there's a good reason for that. If you were a fan watching at the time, can you remember Dean Douglas's Intercontinental Championship reign? If the answer's no, then that's fair enough. Douglas owns the dubious honour of being the shortest reigning IC champion in history, and probably the least deserving as well, as he held the belt for minutes rather than months back in 1995. He was due to wrestle Shawn Michaels for the title, but he no-showed due to IRL getting into a bar fight. Therefore, Douglas was awarded the belt as a forfeit. All well and good for Dean, that was until Razor Ramon showed up and won it from him. It wasn't all bad news for Double D though, as within a year he'd be back in ECW cutting promos on Ric Flair for a living. There was a time when the sky seemed like the limit for Zack Ryder. In 2011, Ryder seemed ahead of the game by actually getting himself over via his YouTube series called Z True Long Island Story, and before long fans were chanting "We want Ryder" in arenas around the world. Naturally, Vince wasn't too keen on his talent promoting themselves outside of his sphere of influence, and so by 2016 Ryder had been on the receiving end of stop-start pushes, humiliations and a downgrading to the lower mid-card, despite somehow still being really over with a big portion of the fan base. And so at WrestleMania 32 in 2016, it was a huge surprise to see Ryder win the belt in a ladder match, also starring the likes of Kevin Owens, The Miz and Sami Zayn. Ryder had replaced Neville in the match, who was injured beforehand, making it even more surprising when he won. For thousands of fans, it seemed like Ryder was finally getting recognised for his hard work, and he looked genuinely overjoyed at winning the title. Turns out it was all a big troll, thanks to Vince and co, as the next night on Raw he lost the belt to The Miz. Ezekiel Jackson's Intercontinental Championship reign was utterly forgettable. Checking Vince McMahon's favourite box for big muscle men, Jackson got a bit of a push around 2010 when he was crowned the final ECW champion, before the brand was thankfully put to rest. As WWE attempted to recreate the success of the Nexus faction, Ezekiel Jackson entered the group with Wade Barrett as leader and then Intercontinental Champion. The faction was a massive flop, so WWE broke them up very quickly, leading to Jackson winning the IC title from Wade Barrett at Capital Punishment in 2011, holding it for 51 forgettable days. Jackson dropped the belt to Cody Rhodes, who incidentally had an incredible run with the belt and managed to re-add a bit of prestige to it. Don't get me wrong, Santino Marella was a perfectly acceptable lower mid-carder and comedy character, if you were 10 years old at the time. Throughout his time in WWE, Marella irritatingly popped up in various comedy matches and spots, including that hilarious time he won the Miss WrestleMania Battle Royal in 2009. Vinnie Mac had such an enjoyable sense of humour, didn't he? Unfortunately, Marella also won Championship Gold and would end up being a one-time Tag Team Champion, a one-time United States Champion, and a two-time Intercontinental Champion. Worse still, Marella won the Intercontinental title immediately upon his debut, which shows just how far the belt had fallen by 2007. It was on an episode of Raw emanating from Milan in Italy when Vince McMahon picked Marella out of the crowd to face IC champion Umaga, and with the help of Bobby Lashley, Marella won the match and the belt. Marella feuded with Chris Masters for a bit before dropping the title back to Umaga. When Marella won the title for a second time, WWE almost acknowledged their terrible treatment of the once prestigious championship as he sought to become the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all times by trying to beat the Honky Tonk Man's record of 64 weeks. He held the belt for 85 days before losing to the far more deserving William Regal.